Okay, folks, we are finally at our penultimate workshop, workshop number 5. Okay, and this is on marketing or other business development and growth, because as I mentioned, our IITians are typically techies and they tend to neglect or ignore some of these commercial aspects like we've had in our workshop 1 through 4, which is conceptualizing an idea, building a team, fundraising. We did 2 sessions on fundraising because that's a make-break situation for a startup. Then we did one on design to production, which, okay, IITians are not weak in that. And finally, we come to this one, not finally, we have one more session to go. So this one is going to be focusing on how are you going to drive that market? How are you going to get the orders? I think in some of the earlier sessions, they touched upon this topic, but not really in depth. After this, we have one last session, which is on exit strategies. Whether you should go IPO or get acquired, but that's the kind of must. If a VC funds you, he's going to expect big bucks in return. So forget about building a lifestyle business. It's not going to happen. You've taken money, you have to give them a certain multiplier return, or else it's not going to go anywhere. Okay? So that the next session we are not going to have here. We are going to have it at the office of our attorney, Fenwick and West, in Mountain View, which is at the crossing of Castro Street and California Avenue. And it'll be very cheap. Okay, we're not going to serve any food. Just outside their office, there's a Pete's or a Starbucks. Collect your coffee, stroll in. We're going to charge you $10, mainly because our person over there, he's building a whole library. I don't know how many of you have seen our website, IITStartups.org. In IITStartups.org, there's a thing called events. In the events, the video recording of every single workshop that we've had, including the inaugural event when Vinod Khosla and all spoke, all of that is recorded, it's put over there. So it's kind of, because people in India have been asking me for that, I said, just look at that, I don't have to say anything. It's all over there. And by the way, people ask me about the PowerPoints are also up there. Okay, I have posted the PowerPoints this past week. Okay, so with that, I want to, that if you picked up a program sheet, it tells you what we're going to discuss and the speaker bios. And I want to introduce my friend Anand Jagannathan. He's from IIT Kanpur. And I've known him from back in the late 80s when he took a company called Banyan public. He founded Banyan and took it public. And of course, although he's an old man, he has kept in touch with the latest. He's been doing startup after startup, and largely in the consumer space. So he knows that game. So I think he has seen it across 30 years, So I thought it'll be best if he's the moderator. And then we have Manish, okay, who would cover the consumer side of marketing, which is a little bit of a different ball game as compared to the enterprise side, which will be covered by Varun. Varun Kohli is from IIT Guwahati. Manish is from IIT Kanpur. So with that, I hand over to Anand.
Thank you all for coming. I think the first basic ground rule is we want to keep this as interactive as possible. And in fact, in the true antithesis of marketing, other than a few introductory slides that I have to set up the context, we don't have any slides. We don't have any videos. We don't have any other fancy. It's all interactive. And so I would encourage you to ask as many questions as possible so that we can sort of set the tone of what you want to do. So with that, I can show the first slide. So what you saw in the website, as well as your invitation to come here and speak, is the 4 P's of marketing. These are very well-known principles, and fundamentally each of them are oriented towards the idea of starting off saying, is there a market? Are the dogs going to eat the dog food? Then will a customer pay? So that you can start generating some revenues. But not really generate revenues, I got to get the product out. So how do I promote it? How do I spread the word? And finally, is there a business? Because it's a very simple rule. If you have negative gross margins, then the more volume you do, the more loss you're going to have. So ultimately, that's the original. Now, having said that, we want to throw that away and says, let's start afresh. So we're going to look at the next slide. Really, today in our market, in the current scenario, it's all about how do you get to customers. So how do you start building up from your first set of leads? Even in the early discussion, people are talking about leads. So it's about leads. How do you get these leads to become prospects? How do you get prospects to become customers? And there are very well-known approaches to looking at this multi-step process, where you first plan your basic marketing program, whether you have the elements or the basic element of websites and blogs, and then you start attracting some people who are your first set of leads using a variety of techniques, and we can talk more about every one of these. Then you try to convert some of these leads so they're not just a fly-by visitor, but kept them coming back and have some hook to keep them coming back. And slowly you start nurturing them where they're more interested, give them more information, and finally you get to a point where you can close them as a prospect. Very important in these days is it doesn't stop there. In most SaaS businesses, you also have to keep them as a customer. The cost of a new customer is a lot more than the cost of retaining an existing customer. So that's why we also add in the whole process that retain is sort of the last element of the whole multi-part step. Now, if you go to the marketing analyst, I hope none of you paid a marketing consultant to come and say, help me do my whole marketing, because first they'll talk about the marketing stack, and this can be very confusing. This, in fact, is the real marketing stack. And in fact, today, the original marketing, MarTech today came out and said it's not 5,000, it's 6,278 technologies in the marketing stack. There's no way you and I are going to figure out how to go through this. And that's why you have these experts here, who will be able to give you the pearls of wisdom on figuring out what needs to happen. So in reality, if you go to the next slide, you really start very simple. You need to try to build some awareness. You try to build some people to start looking at you and make them prospects. You start engaging with them. You initially coordinate with your sales team to make sure that you can go forward, and you start measuring. Very important in all aspects of it is to continue to keep measuring what's happening. And then if you go to the next slide, really, you can then keep adding more and more. There are a lot of different products, a lot of different approaches to every one of these things. And the main point is, don't get too confused, don't get too worried about it. Keep it simple. And that's really the whole purpose of this workshop, is not to preach to you, but to make it more interactive. So in order to set this off, I know that when I was walking through and talking to some of you, because someone said, I spent such and such on something and it didn't work. So I want actually just to get this kicked off, I'd like to invite 4 questions, all read the same thing. I tried this, but it didn't work. Pick one, okay? So I want the first one. I tried this in my marketing, but it didn't work. Okay, so you tried Facebook as Facebook advertising, posting on Facebook. Okay. Okay, so you spent a lot of money on Facebook advertising and got no return, right? Okay, that's one. Second. Okay, but did you do crowdfunding for funding or to build awareness? Okay, so that is the second one. You guys are keeping notes, right? And then the third one in the back.
I tried press releases, it didn't work.
Okay, you tried press releases, it didn't work. And a fourth one?
Hiring a cold calling company to make cold calls to businesses.
Okay, good. So social media advertising, crowdfunding, press releases, and cold calling. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to our stars, and they'll get started on at least coming up with the first set of questions, and then let's make it more interactive. Okay. So Manish, you want to go first? Pick one. Press releases.
Sure. Just for my edification, how many of you are looking at ideas that are in the consumer or maybe prosumer kind of a way? One way to think about it is, how many of you will need maybe to generate $1 million of revenue, maybe more than 500, 600 people?
Raise your hand.
It's quite a few people. Okay, great. So I'll take press releases. I think that's a really good one. But I think stepping back, I think any kind of marketing in my mind requires a sustained effort. So if you don't have the ability to sustain that effort, then scaling these campaigns is hard. And sometimes you can hit a jackpot, which is within $10,000. You can sort of start to do that. Sometimes it takes millions of dollars before you can optimize a campaign. So sustaining is one piece. So similarly, if you think of press releases as a specific thing, if you drop a press release, but the press release itself is not getting placed out in the media, it will have limited exposure, right? Which means press release by itself is not an engine. You need a press agency, you need a strategy, you need sort of all of those pieces. So with any sort of area, my general advice would be you have to sort of understand how much sustainability do you have, how many times can you iterate through it before you are ready to either give up or start a sort of new set of experiments.
I would totally agree with that. I'll probably pick up the next one, cold calling one. But on press releases, there's the strategy piece. Yes, the press release is dropped, but if you did not pre-pitch it to media, no one's going to write about it. Why will they write about it? Because you already knew what their schedule of writing looks like, and you aligned your press release with what was interesting to them. I'll give you an example. SkyCure, the company that I used to run marketing at, we got acquired by Symantec 8 months ago. And tiny Israeli company, I joined as first business hire, first hire in the US. 10 engineers, 2 co-founder, I come in to run marketing. And we made it all the way to the Today Show, which is watched by 5 million people in the United States, second most watched news program. How come an enterprise security boring company makes it to the Today Show? And that has to do with press releases. The reason why I pulled that example is we looked at and we were a mobile security company. So you see Today's Show, watched by consumers, moms of age 19 to 45. Why would a mobile security company be interesting to them? So the angle that we pulled was how many tourist destinations are there, pull the top 50 tourist destinations, and then tell them what are the most malicious tourist destinations to pull out your phone and connect to a Wi-Fi. So Times Square happens to be number 1. Golden Gate Park here in San Francisco happens to be number 4. The safest place on the planet is Taj Mahal because there's no bandwidth, there's no hacker, there's no connectivity. So that's an angle. Is that an angle that can be interesting to media? Of course it was very interesting. We were on 250 plus TV channels because of that. All the local TV channels came to our office. One day I was not even dressed properly. I had to go to the gas station, get a shaving razor, and get in front of TV right then and there. That was on press release. The other thing was cold calling company. Why does that not work? Before I pull that, anything that you guys said it did not work, before you say that it did not work, make sure you define your goals. Because sometimes people say it did not work. Like you did not know what the goal was. Maybe it did. Cold calling is interesting, reason being on an average, to create an opportunity in the enterprise space, you would probably spend, I won't even say opportunity, I'll say the first meeting, you would probably spend $800 to $1,000. So if you say it did not work, that means you probably spent more, that's why it did not work. Or the meeting happened, but your product or the story did not work, and therefore it did not convert. So if you outsource the cold calling, in most cases it does not work. And along the next hour, I'll come up with all the other things that don't work. I have my notes. But cold calling is something that's better if you hire in-house and hire fresh, hungry grads. Elon Musk does that all the time. He would pay $45,000 to a fresh Stanford grad and make them pull up. I spoke with someone this morning on Tesla roof. He had no idea about what he was talking about. So I agree with you, Tejwani, right? That cold calling does not work. Outsourced one.
So Varun, some people do believe that actually having a team in some place like India and giving them a bunch of companies and figuring out through LinkedIn, they using the Sales Navigator, they go look at it, and seems to be effective. Now, you agree, not agree?
No, I don't agree. I used a company based out of Israel, and yes, these things are cheap, But you have to understand, once the company has called on your behalf, used your name, chances are you burn that bridge forever if they did not do a good job. So there is only a handful of companies. If you're selling into the enterprise space and you're looking at 5,000 plus employees companies, there are only 2,700 of them in the United States. If you hire a company out of India and they call every single one of them, good luck if they don't do a good job. So I don't agree that an outsourced model, don't compromise on quality. They are representing your company, make sure they're doing a bang-up job on that. They're doing a good job on that.
So the other question was on Facebook advertising, and I'm going to turn this to Mr. Consumer here. You created one of the most successful consumer-facing companies, and maybe you want to give a 2-minute description of Poshmark, because that will set the context.
Sure. Poshmark is a social marketplace for fashion. We created a company which kind of challenged many of the norms, as it's now one of the largest sort of e-commerce marketplaces in the country. It's built primarily, in the early days, it was built primarily for women. We actually launched a men's version about a year and a half back. And it allows women to sell stuff from their closet. You can also open up a boutique. We also have partnership with the brands where you can sell through it. Just a couple of high-level stats that'll give you some sense of the product is average active user on the platform spends about 20 to 25 minutes a day on the platform and opens the app 7 to 9 times a day, which actually exceeds Snapchat's daily engagement level and is just slightly below Instagram in terms of daily engagement. We have about 3.5 million sellers, which is more sellers on the platform than Etsy, right? And the last piece I'll give you is that cohorts. How many people are familiar with the notion of a cohort, right? Everyone? Cohort is a group of users who generate revenue and join around the same time, but you can have other kinds of cohorts, employee cohorts, etc. So our cohorts have this unique characteristic, which is very uncommon in e-commerce, that they keep growing instead of shrinking. So they behave more like SaaS cohorts than consumer cohorts. So going back to sort of Facebook advertising and marketing, the key thing with Facebook is that the place where Facebook is super effective today is actually mobile. And when you start to get to mobile, the place where it's super effective is looking at the demographic that is actually casually trying to engage with your product. So if you have a product or a technology that you want to sort of integrate that, then that makes sense. Having said that, it's a highly competitive market because today on mobile, Facebook is the largest advertiser. You're right up there with Google. Everyone, like a big chunk of our budget, somewhere between 50+% is in Facebook, Instagram, mostly predominantly on Facebook, some on Instagram. So it's a very large chunk of our spend and every other company spend on mobile. And then the third thing is that if you don't have anything to work with against Facebook, it may be a highly competitive channel to go after. So one of the things I would say is when you start to look at these paid channels as a way to sort of bring in traffic and convert them into whatever your target conversion is, buyer, user, whatever it is, you have to ask yourself at what stage you are at. So for us, in the first 2 years of the company almost, we scaled the company very slowly. So in fact, for the first 4 months of the launch, we only got 1,000 users, and they were recruited through physical events that we did across the Bay Area in LA. So in the early stages of a business, which I'm expecting many of you are in, unscalable strategies can actually work in recruiting the users that you need to actually convert to your target market.
So I guess the takeaway here is this, that if you're starting very early, physical Facebook, which is really legs on the street and going into malls and everything else, is what's going to work. Now, Manish, though, how do you know it's effective? How do you know, what is your measure, calculation of saying that your ROI on your Facebook ad spend?
So I think, to me, it's about activations. It's not about the volume at the top, it's about activation. So, in consumer, you can have a user, but if the user does nothing, they're not yet activated. But if the user does whatever your target action is, which is either to subscribe to your service, buy a product, or at least get close to buying a product where you can say they're activated, and it'll be another 2-week long cycle. So early indications of activation is very, very important. When we tried physical events, what we found was, for us, the best user is someone who's activated both as a seller and a buyer. And even in remote areas, we could activate things at a higher volume. And that sort of engine and cycle became very positive for us.
Funnel is very important for people to set up, campaign leaders who can be convergence. Is that not the right way to go? You have to set up some ads for awareness, some ads for taking the lookalike from the awareness to some ads for Facebook, add to cart, and then
No. You can do more direct conversion campaigns. I think the question is, what is your conversion funnel, right? So if your conversion funnel involves the download of an app, then you have to focus on the primary thing, which is download of an app. If you're going straight for product conversions, then I would say Google or Facebook DPA is a better sort of channel on that side, because both of them are doing item level marketing, right? So core Facebook discovery, and for item level marketing in Facebook, you need some data, so you need some sort of engagement on your platform. Google you don't need, you can market it at the very top of the funnel. Facebook will say you can market at the top of the funnel. It's less effective if you're doing it just for buyer conversions. If you're doing for app downloads, it works really, really well across the board. So you have to sort of define your goal, I think as Varun was saying, and based on that, different kinds of advertising engines have different effectiveness overall.
Anand, do you want the questions at the end of each section, or you want them as we go
No,
along?
I think it should be interactive.
Okay,
I think
then anybody asking a question, ask them for the mic, because
Yes.
your question needs to be recorded, because it's going worldwide to all the IITs, okay?
Right. Okay, so I want to finish the fourth question, which is the why Indigo campaigns didn't work, and Varun, you may want to take that and say, what. So to set the context, when you say Indigo campaigns, I asked you specifically, is it for financing, is it for awareness? Maybe explain what did you want, if you want to get the mic, what did you want to do in terms of awareness? Did you ask people to say, you're going to get a free version of the product, or did you ask them to say, give me money, and what is, because there are famous Indigo campaigns that have failed. And so what is your hook?
Yeah, so we were actually planning to sell like a smart home product, and mainly for seniors, like for fall detection. And this was something that we did last year actually. And our goal was to at least have about 100 customers for the potential product, right? And we tried many ways to generate awareness, reached out to some prominent bloggers in the senior care space, reached out to friends and family, and none of them seem to work. I don't know if it's because we're not doing it the right way, or there is an inherent problem with the product or the service itself.
So I can definitely add my opinion there. What's more important is, before we pick a channel, it's very important to define your buyer persona. And I do get this question a lot, and you answered your own question. How many seniors do you think know about Indigo campaign? How many? Okay, that's better. That's much better, because if you're selling to seniors and pushing at a medium that seniors don't go to, and similar question comes, should I spend on PPC, paid per click? You should spend on PPC if your buyer is the one who's doing searches. If your buyer is a CISO, and the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, tells their team to go do research and the team is doing searches. So you have to have a proper match before you pull, and I don't know why you chose crowdsourcing as the medium. Before you choose a medium, find your buyer. What do they do? Do they read reports? Do they check emails? Do they talk to analysts? Do they go to a particular type of event? Do they hang out on a particular social media site? Whatever they do the most, start there.
So to add one point to this, which Manish mentioned, he said when he started, they went physically and met with a bunch of people. Did you ever consider going to 10 senior homes and going and talking to the people, and what kind of, did you get a response back?
Thank you. Yeah, so we did. We actually, I went, and a few other folks from my company, we went and talked to the seniors, and we talked to the children of the seniors. Again, the problem I think is, like we didn't know who would exactly buy. Like everyone has a parent or a grandparent, someone, and we thought the market is pretty broad, like almost anyone could be. But then we realized a lot of people express the interest, but they don't necessarily buy. So there is something that we missed, and so that was probably an issue.
Yeah.
So how many, before you even started to do this, how many actual users of your product did you have?
So this was conceptual. We just proposed that, hey, we're
Okay.
building something like this because Indiegogo, right? So
Okay.
the idea was we showed some sketches, we
Okay.
showed like a prototype, and
Okay.
we had a video that showed how the product can potentially work.
Okay.
We didn't actually build a real product yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's really still more product validation. So it's not, it is a phase of marketing, but it's kind of a pre-product.
yeah,
So it's
you're-
slightly different.
You're only doing market research.
Yeah.
So it's not really a marketing program, you're doing market research.
Research, yeah.
Pro-
To know
product
if there are any
evaluation.
customers for that.
A related point I wanted to share with, particularly on the consumer or sort of larger scale volume side, is that quite often people get a few users, let's say you got 3 to 4 users of the product, and you have to scale through a marketing engine, and people get, you get feedback from the investors, show me this scale, and so I'm going to sort of do the revenue, which kind of forces the people to kind of take the next step and start scaling their marketing. I think an inherent point that most investors forget to tell you is that the precursor for any consumer prosumer product is the shape of your cohort curve. The shape of your cohort curve is based on how engaged and frequently used is your product. Because if you build a very deeply engaging product, you can always, I can scale any deeply engaging product which has sort of the core thing. Now, if you're going to do paid scaling for that, you have to have a monetization engine attached to it. So engagement should include monetization. But if you ignore past that, that core engagement metric is the first thing I ask any team that I'm looking at. And if you don't have a handle on your core engagement metric, then scaling marketing is actually a foolhardy way to kind of spend your money.
So is cohort another way to look at virality? Or
No,
it's
no,
different
no,
from
no,
virality?
no, not at all virality.
Okay.
It has to look at, if I'm a user of this product, how frequently am I using this product? How deeply am I using this product? Am I actually willing to pay money if that is part of your thesis, right? So when we launched our site, we had, whatever, few thousand users. But from day one, we had this stat of 7 to 9 opens and 20 to 25 minutes, right? 6 years later, when we have millions and millions of users, we still have that same stat true. So that was something which was inherently characteristic, and you can build a business around it. But let's say you have most of the users just churn the next day, and there's hardly anybody engaging with the product, then you have to go fix the product before you scale the marketing. Marketing is not going to fix your product.
Right.
There's very few businesses where marketing can fix a product. And so that is, one of the worst advice you get from investors, because they're asking you to prove a revenue or a growth metric. And you can spend money, you can get a temporary revenue metric, and then it all shrinks away if you don't have that cohort engagement.
You had a question? May want to also give you a name. And
Hi, I'm Manav Kataria from IIT Bombay. I had a question about how do you go and actually physically speak with people, especially in a consumer product, because you can't really go to conferences and set up a booth. So are you like standing in front of a mall and showing your app to users, sending out leaflets? What does that look like?
Good.
So very, very good question. I think in our pursuit, I actually, because it was primarily women and primarily young women, so obviously me going and asking them would be very awkward and it's not going to come. So we actually had a couple of women in the team who effectively targeted primarily fashion-rich audiences. So blogger meetups, fashion shows, college campuses, etc. And we created a flow. So we had the people with a single call to action, which is once a week on Wednesday nights, we would meet at the district bar in San Francisco from 7 to 9. The call to action would come here and discover about what we are doing. And that simple call to action led to maybe 2 people showing up, 4, 10, 12, 20. At the end, we started to have 40, 50, and we had to shift the venues. But that was sort of the simple call to action. And then we would actually show them how to use the product, or actually have physical product that they could buy and sell, or actually facilitate transactions that were happening. But you have to use sort of the right sales channel or recruitment channel, and then if you use the right sort of venue. And even with a broad-based product, I think you can find rich sources of your early stage users in other places other than, mall could be a good place, but there are many other places where people are more receptive to a message.
Right. I think one perspective on that is, in a mall, they may be doing something else, and you're interrupting someone's behavior. Here, I assume you provided free food and free wine and cheese. That's the best way, because now you're going to get this. First, people may be coming for the free food, but then the word goes around, more people know about it, And then as Manish said, you'll start building a momentum and then you can start doing it across. I think there are some other companies that did the same thing in terms of using events to market.
I think many of the fashion-oriented startups have had that sort of strategy out there. I would say if you go back to sort of many of the social networks, they started in physically small locations, like a single college campus dominated it and then moved on from there.
In the fashion industry, there's a very successful startup in New York, which was basically selling off-market designs or whatever. They did a lot with these kind of events and trying to get a fashion thing to come and talk, and then they would have that. So sometimes you need a hook. You need a person to give the hook.
So great clarification, great question answered, but I just wanted a clarification here. So are these people who are coming to these events, are these people who want to sell stuff and hence make money out of it, or is this just the people, and how would you rather target this to people who just want to engage with the platform and may not have monetary gains, but rather would spend money on the platform?
We did not know. We had no idea. We just knew that they were coming, and then their behavior and how sort of moving them down the loop was kind of part of the learning curve, right, to see sort of how they were interacting. In fact, this was so early that most people, there was a large percent of the population, which is hard to imagine today, but who didn't have an iPhone or an Android phone. Android was not even a factor, but they didn't have an iPhone. So we actually, we had some funding, so we went and bought 100 iPod videos, which I don't know if you even remember that device, and actually gave it out actively to people because they didn't have a phone to use and take photos at home.
You want to go, Manish? Right there, man. You had a question.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm Manish Kulkarni from IIT Bombay. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm in the capital equipment business, and my customers are like scientists and professors in the universities. Should we use like a sales agency or like different branding company or different brand name to partner to sell our product, or should we try to sell the first product ourselves?
Let me take it first and then turn it over to Varun. So there's actually a very established concept of manufacturers reps, which have been around for a long time, where these are the guys who are experts. They carry bunches of products, and you get hooked into them. But the first 10 customers, you have to close yourself because no one is going to validate the market. But if you get those and those are references, you will actually find the concept of distribution companies, resellers, manufacturers. It's a very efficient way, and the companies have done it very, very successfully using variety of scales. So you can do that. But you got to first establish it and figure out what kind of thing. So the best way is that if you can find that you're doing capital equipment, if there are other companies also selling into scientists and everything, then you know, okay, what products, how do they use it, who's selling them, and then go find that out. But Varun?
Yeah, that's a very basic question as to do I go direct sales model or do I go the channel model? And every company, especially in the enterprise space, will face this sooner or later. And I totally agree with what Anand said. Initially, you have to go sell it yourself. Once you have captured the market, later stages channel will do it, but even between the two, there's another stage in which you will pay the channel for doing nothing. So you'll actually pay them points, you'll take them with you, you will do all the closing, they'll get 30 points out of the deal. But once they get a few of those, they know how to do it, they know how easy it is, that's when they'll start bringing you new leads. And we did it day in, day out. We paid channel for nothing, 30 points just for going with us, because as he said, they also sell other products into the same buyer. And that's when you get their trust, because when we create startups, when we create companies, we think it's the hot potato and they'll drop everything that they have and they'll start selling a product. Let me break your heart, that doesn't happen. Because they're making their revenues, they're making their commissions on the products that are selling. They have no reason to add another product to their portfolio. Give it to them for free, 30 points, it hurts, but once you have done it a few times, it starts paying off. And that's the only way to scale. You can never hire enough direct sales people to go be the billion-dollar startup. The channel is the route, and some of the largest companies on the planet are channel friendly. Our numbers are at Symantec, 90% of our revenue comes from channel.
Good.
Shubhendu, IIT Kharagpur. So my question is, about a B2C space. So Manish, when you were recruiting the people through very offline events, so was it as far as the product market fit, did you achieve the product market fit, or you were kind of learning through this initial cohort of users? And the second part of the question is, what's your take on, and again in a very early phase, sort of creating the the organic content, could be blog post, sort of generating some sort of just like organic content and get the word out. Thanks.
So, growth is always dirty. It's never pretty. So I can share a couple of different things. And as I said, we had to buy video iPods. When we were starting this process, we wanted to just get users and start to get some engagement in our product. We didn't know how the buying, we had thesis, of course, and thesis fortunately came out to be true. But one of the things we found is that when 8 or 10 people got together simultaneously, the level of activation was very high, right? And so we actually pioneered a concept called Posh Party, which is a very core driver of our thing, which are actually virtual events that happen in the system. So a product innovation came out of these physical events. Then we had these virtual parties that were going on. When we launched the product on a broader basis in early 2012, there were still no cost-efficient marketing engines available, believe it or not. Facebook had not arrived on the scene at all. They were missing. They were very expensive ad networks. So I actually decided to take the show on the road. We started to throw physical events in LA and Texas, and the play script for those physical events was slightly different than the early stage events, where we would have PR place spokesperson in the local TV station, combine it with inviting 3 or 4 fashion bloggers to our event, which we worked on for weeks in advance, didn't pay anybody, and then host this event at a nice sort of hotel lobby, which was cheap to get, actually the cheapest place you can get, and invite people. And that led to both activations, engagement, as well as awareness in the city, and started to give us the scaling till we actually started to see real acquisition channels emerge, which took a good another sort of 6-9 months before any of these things emerged overall.
There was another second part of your question about content, organic content. Right. Yeah, I'll give you a context in the context of a different company, the well-known marketing automation company. It's publicly called HubSpot. They started out with providing a huge amount of free marketing content. You want to learn about marketing, any particular topic, you didn't have to come here. You actually went to HubSpot and you got a lot of free marketing content. But what they did was they created a customer base. They started creating a bunch of interest, and they got to a lot of people who are in very early stage marketers looking for various kinds of solutions. So if you can write organic content, so for instance, I mean, if you just take hypothetical thing, what space are you in? Okay, so let us say that you are able to get 2 or 3, maybe not the top level guys, but financial analyst type guys, and they write something, and you may sometimes you have to pay some of them to get it, but what it does is it gets the word out. A cheaper way to do this is essentially be the curator of financial content. Be the curator of financial content, which means you're every day selecting one piece of content and saying, here is my view on what's important in this space, and putting that on your social media timeline as well, your company timeline as well, your friends' timeline. What you're establishing is thought leadership. So you can actually use free content to establish thought leadership, and then having proprietary content to start building it. Content is absolutely the way to drive a lot of visibility and awareness.
I agree with what you're saying. I just think that one thing which is key is when you're producing content, writing something, engaging with people, you have to be authentic. You have to be true. You have to believe that you're in their service, right? If you're using it thinking, you've read a growth hack article and you're just going to do it, it's not going to fly, right? So if you say, I'm not serving myself with this content to market my product, I'm servicing someone and I'm in that service, who I'm serving, if you have that person in mind and you feel like if I was that person, I'm going to get serviced by this content, you're going to get it right. But if you do it as a growth hack, it's not going to come.
Add on that, HubSpot example is great. HubSpot published in the initial days 19 blogs a week. One of the blogs out of those 19 was about their product. 18 of them were not. So to Manish's point, if you're providing value, provide value to your customer without trying to game the system. Everyone's smart. Don't think you'll be able to give them something and then ask for their email and then capture their information, start selling it to them. Market to others as you would like marketed to yourself. That's the trick. And the other tip number one, I'll make sure I throw some tips there. Number one is find out the space that you're in. I'll give you example of SkyCure. We defined a new space called mobile threat defense. And one of the first things on content we did was, what is mobile threat defense? Do yourself a favor, go home, write that blog for your company, what is XYZ? And XYZ is not your product, XY is not your company, XYZ is the space. It is what is cloud security, what is CRM, and thank me 2 years from now when you're number one on Google when someone searches. We did this, very minor hack, it will take you to the top.
Any question in the back?
I have the mic. Hi, Rohit here from IIT Kharagpur. I had a question about B2B area. Specifically for us, we are a tech company looking to get into retail sector. So how do you tell us some examples or strategies for 0 to 1 problem in that retail area or any B2B for that matter? So strategies.
So you said you're B2B but retail, or explain that a little bit.
So we're trying to sell to other retailers who can then sell.
Okay,
to
so you're
use their
selling a
technology.
B2B solution to retailers.
Yes.
And you want to know how do you get your first retailer, how do you market to your retailer?
Yeah, what are the strategies to reach them? How do you?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Warren, you want to take
Yeah, I think we are over and over coming back to the similar question, what is that we try? And as I said earlier, find out who is your ideal buyer persona. Who is that? In that retail company, is it the VP of Corp Dev? Is it the VP of supply chain? Whatever that thing is, that person is. And what do they do? If there is an event that they attend, that is the event where you should go market. If they listen to peers, you have to go find that peer network and go do that. There are certain events, and events, I wish there was this Yelp of events, because if you're a CMO, you would get at least 5 to 7 new events every day that people will say, hey, pay me 60 grand, I have 60 CISOs in a room, you'll get 60 minutes with them speed dating, and there's so many of them, but you would not know which one to choose, which one not, you can pass on. And you will learn this as you go, but buyer persona, what is it that they do? That's my suggestion. For retail, look at a conference, number one conference for retailers. And where do they go? Do you always need a booth? Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can get a hotel room very close to the conference and make sure you do the pre-work. Some people get to a conference and then hope and pray that someone will show up to their booth. That's not the way to do it. The way to do it is do the pre-work a month or 2 months before the conference, set up meetings. Can I meet with you at 12 p.m. below the elevator, below the escalator? Just have that, even if it is random time, random place. Make sure you do the pre-work, do the calling. And your schedule is already packed even before you go to the conference. But that's just one way of getting traction. The 3 things that worked great for us was, number 1 was events, number 2 was cold calling, as you mentioned, but in-house cold calling. Number 3 was website trials. So they work great. Webinars work great for some of the other, depending on what your business model is.
So let me interject a question here. So you mentioned about events. So there's always, I'm sure startups, they're always concerned about, do I invest in a trade show? No, do I buy the booth and take on? So what is your opinion of whether you invest in a booth in a trade show? You did mention about the fact that some events, but if you're hard thing, is that one of the first expenses you would do?
No, that trade show would not be the first expense that I would do. And it also depends on how expensive it is. I'll give you an example of RSA. Some of you probably attended that. Started with a small meetup. Now it's the largest security conference on the planet. Probably 1492 vendors, 40,000 attendees, and it costs $12,500 to have a booth. Is it the most expensive booth that you'll do? Probably not. It's one of the cheapest. But do you have the buyers walking the floor? No. So if your goals are clear, I don't want leads from my booth. I want awareness. If you're in security and you don't have a booth, people will think you have gone out of business. So you have to have a booth for different reasons. But if you're doing a booth, make sure your buyer is going to show up, or you at least have identify your goals from that booth, and don't just throw darts in the dark and assume it's going to work.
So it's got to be targeted to your line of interest. Like you're in security, so you went to RSA.
Yes.
Would you go to Comdex? No, it's dead, that's dead now.
Probably not.
No, okay.
And sort of to that point, like if you're talking about retail, right? There are actually retail conferences where it's smaller, it's not the ones with the booth, but part of the conference, what they do is they try to, if you're like a sponsor, and you can buy a variety of sponsors, and many of them have startup sponsor packages, they will actually get you some meetings with key people in many of these retailers. That's part of their whole way of how to build up. They try to encourage the startups. So we can find that actually is a good example. And then I've seen that in many businesses where as a startup, you can get special privileges and work with the show producer. It is not where you just have a booth, because the worst thing you can do in the early stages is spend a lot of money in a booth because people won't come there. But the ones where they are more targeted, where they actually have specific one-on-one meetings they set up, and there are companies that do that, they actually are pretty effective. There's the next question? You got a question? Or?
Hi, my name is Raghuram. I'm from IIT Madras. I have two questions. One is in the case of the events where you called in some bloggers to your event.
Do you mind standing up so we can see who you are? I know Manish said don't, but yeah, go ahead.
What is the pull for the bloggers to come to your event? What is their incentive to come? That's one thing. And one is another is a devil's advocate. What can you refer to some marketing campaigns by current day unicorns, somebody which you think will not work, just so we understand what doesn't work?
Sure. Okay, so I think Manish, you want to take the blogger issue because you guys did a lot with fashion bloggers.
I did not get the second part.
Okay, we'll first talk about the first part of it. The first part was you specifically asked and said that how do you attract bloggers?
No. Why would that blogger come?
Why would how do you attract a blogger? Why would they come to an event that you have?
And the second part is basically.
We'll roll out the second part. Let's finish this, then we'll come back to that.
I think in the early days, it was very much around the social pull. So you build a connection, they're coming because of you, people are attracting people. Over time, the people start to see value, so you can actually start to attract them based on value. But the pull of an event is still people and peer-to-peer. So if you get one blogger, then others will come, etc. So, or you can pull in your personal connection with them, not your personal network, but personal connection that you established at another event with them. And let's say you got person A, then you can say person B, that person A is coming. So it's just kind of like how you build a crowd around a core area.
And you want to talk about the second part?
Yeah.
What is the second part of the question?
Yeah, the second part is, like, for example, TechCrunch and all will publish a lot of articles about XYZ marketing, some stuff. How do you identify something that is not working? Is it like when you see that they're changing after 5-6 times, they're trying the same thing 5-6 times? So I'm looking for some ways to figure out what doesn't work in my industry.
Sure. Okay. So your question was, what are some examples of marketing that doesn't work? And let me first take a cut at it and then turn it over. It's contextual. So the thing that works for you may not work for someone else. Same way what works for someone else may not work for you. So you have to come back to the basic earlier discussion. You got to identify who's the persona of the buyer, what are the goals you're trying to achieve with a specific program, and then go from there. So you cannot just take a blanket thing that something doesn't work or works. You have to look in the context. But you want to add to that?
Is that question what does not work in marketing? Is that what you're saying?
How do you identify something that the competitor is failing at in terms of marketing, and then you not do the same thing?
How do you identify that a competitor is doing what?
So you're doing X and marketing, and competitor is doing Y. How do you figure out whether Y is working out fine or not? And then, if it's not working out, so that you don't have to repeat it.
Yeah, that I think $1 million question. What is that my competitor is doing that's not working? You'll know that only if you know their funnel and their conversion from that funnel. How many leads did they generate? Or you hire from your competitor. Right. That's the other time you would know that.
Which you got to be careful about.
Yeah, very careful about that. And I don't think you can One thing you can do, there are certain tools. For example, what is that competitor using? There are certain tools, plugins on your website. You go put that competitor website, they'll tell you they're using HubSpot. They're using other CRM. They're using this WordPress. There are tools to do that, but how much of the conversion is happening from the investments they're making, there is no easy way to know that.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think one other piece of advice I would have you is that watching the competition is overhyped. And one of the sort of the core philosophies we have at Poshmark is embrace your weirdness, which is figure out your strength and build on it. Trying to look at other people and copying them is a sure way to fail, which is not to say that you don't keep an eye on them, but you have so many good strengths all within you, and that's how you're going to succeed.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jnani Palanikumar, IIT Madras. My question is in relation to the lifetime value of customers. What is the importance of lifetime? Because you always talk about buyer personas, but if I have a product which is lifetime value is less than 500, the marketing may be different from when my lifetime value is 500 to 10,000. So the impact of lifetime value of the customer in marketing.
In order to kick that off, if you remember the last thing I had in the 7th step was retain. And that sort of comes back to the whole idea of a lifetime value. It can be episodic, like Amazon has a very good lifetime value. Episodic means that you come there, you buy one thing, then you buy another thing and buy another thing. The other aspect of it is a continued SaaS revenue where you have a customer and they continue giving you SaaS revenue and keep increasing. So it depends. So that...
Sure. So I think lifetime value actually takes a lifetime to study, because it takes a long time before you can have a true model of lifetime value. So to really figure out your lifetime value, you have to use early indicators and the nature of your product. So the nature of your product depends upon how frequently is the person using it, which was sort of, one of the first metrics I talked about. If you have highly frequent usage and that usage is monetizable either directly or indirectly, then obviously over time, if people are using it frequently and a lot of people are using it frequently, you're going to have a high lifetime value. Doesn't matter whether you're monetizing it today or not. So I think people will, again, ask a question of lifetime value. If you're 1 year into your service, 6 months into your service, that data will be misleading. Because when you recruit your first 1,000 customers, you recruit your next million customer, and you recruit a 5 million customer, lifetime value dramatically evolve for a variety of reasons. And by the way, in a perverse way, people will say it'll always go down, and I just shared with you a business where it goes up counterintuitively. So things can change there dramatically. So I would say in the early days, particularly in the first year of operation, you have to use leading indicators to kind of do a computation of lifetime value, because you're not able to fully understand the unit economics because you're doing unscalable things, right? However, if the business itself doesn't have a core characteristic that you can actually scale it, so from a business feasibility perspective, you want to understand it, so you have to price your service correctly. Another sort of axiom I'd share with you that everything that you're creating can become massive, right? So a way to think about it is to say, if I took this little widget I'm building and I were to build $1 billion business, what would it take, right? Visualizing that, first of all, allows to visualize the greatness of what you're creating, and it answers many questions of what kind of pricing, et cetera, you have to do. You don't have to get there, but putting that chart makes you dream very, very big about what you're doing. And when you dream big, you're likely to pursue it, and you're actually likely to succeed much better than when you dream small.
One last thing I'll add to that is just looking at LTV, lifetime value, is probably not the right thing to do. You also have to look at CAC, customer acquisition cost. So how much did you spend on that customer to acquire that customer? If you spent $1,000 and LTV is $500, your business is about to shut down. So if you spent only $20, and even if the customer is bringing in $50 over a lifetime, that's still okay. So don't just look at LTV, also look at CAC.
Okay, in the Shark Tank, we find that each of the sharks is specialized in a certain channel. Somebody is in fashion, somebody knows the HSN network, another one knows the Walmart network, and they tell the people who are bidding for some money that this is where I can take you. And those guys typically try to play, not just for the money, but also for who is best equipped to help me market the thing to the channel that they know best of all. How effective is that? I mean, any views on that?
So is the question, where would you find an advisor to help you on a particular channel? Because none of the people here are
Advisor or angel investor, as the sharks are.
Okay. So so your question is, how can you select an investor who would actually help you with the marketing program or to help you grow the company? So maybe I'll start with you, Varun, and what did you choose the investor who really helped you with growing SkyQ?
Yeah, I think it's very important and it does help. Find the market, adjacent market to you. For example, in our case, SkyCure, it was mobile security. It plays right next to mobile management, EMM, MDM. So MDM players are AirWatch. The head of sales and chief operating officer for AirWatch VMware was on the board of SkyCure. Mobile Iron is another one. The first investor of Mobile Iron Foundation Capital was on the board of SkyCure. Third one is Citrix. Jairam Bhatt, ex-CEO of ZenPrice, that's the company that Citrix acquired, was on the board of SkyCure. So it definitely helps because they've already seen what works, what doesn't work. And if you're choosing a partner, investor, angel investor, that can bring you that channel, go with them, even if it is a little bit lesser of a deal. In the long run, it will pan out to be better.
Manish?
Varun articulated it really well. I would say that in general, people who have operating knowledge are likely to help you. There's investors come in all guises, and they can sometimes help you scale. It's harder for them to help you when you have more of a green field. Having said that, I actually want to build on what you just said, which is sometimes we try to do everything ourselves, right? Because we feel like we have to in the early stages. And marketing and sales, if it's not completely in your DNA, sales you have to have some sort of a DNA, but marketing may or may not be in your DNA. So finding that right partner, even if you have to give a percentage of your equity to them, whatever you have to do, like that company found him and look at how amazing he is. So you have to find that partner even in the early days. And I think you should not be reluctant to say, I'm stupid, let me go find that partner or that person, because that will shave off a lot of energy and ensure you much better success in the future, because companies don't get built by individuals, they get built by a village.
So have one other perspective on this. If you look at the investor, my own approach is try to get the best quality of investor. I mean, my own experience, the responses, I got Axel and Foundation were very top quality, and not necessarily because they were the guys who knew all about online marketing. Because the real top quality investors have access to a huge thing. I mean, they set up meetings with all the top level guys out there that we didn't have to. Then it is very important for us to get, as Varun mentioned, advisors, pay them equity, who can help you at a very operational level. You need the advisor you can call, because it's not the investor, who can call and say, I'm running into this problem, how do I approach it? We actually had 3 advisors. We paid equity. In fact, we actually let them invest in the early round, because it was more of a sort of round. So it's not like we gave them, but we gave them additional equity, who were amazing in terms of a lot of different questions. So I think to answer your question, you can separate the notion of the investor. Now, Shark Tank is very different because they're all one class of investors and everything else. But in the Valley, if you can get a premium investor, they will actually get you contacts with whatever subject area expertise you need.
And Manish said it, if marketing is not in your DNA, get the person, right person, and get out of their way. It's very important that you do not pull them in wrong directions. Once you have built your trust, he's the right person, she's the right person for it, get out of their way. Don't let ego come in the way of your pocket.
I have a question regarding sales and marketing. Hi, I'm Harish Tejwani, IIT Roorkee. So in terms of your advice for a B2B company, early stages where cash is king, when do you invest in sales versus when do you invest in marketing? Even in enterprise world, people sell to people, so you need a sales team if you are truly building an enterprise class product. And then to build awareness, you need marketing. So what's the right time to bring in full-time marketing person or supplement a sales team? Any thoughts or any advice around that? So
Sure, I'll get started on that. You are the first sales guy. If you're not able to sell to 5 people you know because you have contacts, or you've asked someone to give you a favor and say, introduce me to this guy, then you're not validating your product. So I actually would first say that you need to get your first set of sales customers. Right, and then the question is what is your type of customer? If you have 10 customers, you're doing very well, then invest in the sales guy who knows about it. If on the other hand, you have to have 100 customers on a broader thing, then you may have to invest in marketing programs because in order to reach 100 customers.
I agree, and that depends on your ASP as well. So if your ASP is $100,000 or $1 million, you're only looking for a few. A sales guy would come in with a Rolodeck and he'll probably have 4 or 5 customers. But if your ASP is 10K, you need a bunch of people in the pipe. Marketing is the way to go because they'll bring a lot of people in the pipe. And then you can get sales to go through that after you are done filling your own calendar.
Hi, I'm Pratik from REC Jaipur. I think so. You talked about the marketing DNA, right? So how do you inculcate or develop that DNA? Because Manish, what you did was, I think it's truly unique. And how do you think on those lines?
He wants you to spread your DNA.
Well, no. That's the wrong answer. The right answer is embracing your weirdness. It already exists inside of you. That's why you're thinking of the idea you have. What you are really reluctant to embrace it is because you're not sort of fully able to say that I could be this person and an IITian at the same time, right? That I could be inside the head of a 20-year-old woman and at the same time be an IITian, right? So you have to sort of embrace it fully. That's one. The second is, when I say marketing DNA, I mean the fact that there is an optimization. This is true marketing. If you're trying to optimize Facebook campaigns, etc., it takes a certain mindset. And if you're building a product or you're doing something like, I would say at that level of working against a channel is not in my DNA. I've always had to recruit and partner up with people. Thinking about sort of at the broader level, I've run marketing teams, etc. I have that in my DNA. So at a strategy level, I can think, but at the execution level, I need partners. So that's what I meant by that. At the core level of thinking about what your product is, how does it connect to the consumer, that level of marketing, you have to put yourself in the mind. That's what I'm saying, you have to be authentic. And you have to sort of, and the way to think about it is, who are you servicing, and how do you understand what they are doing in this world, and how do you connect through that world? So one of the things I would say is that, I spent the first sort of 10, maybe 15 years of my career in enterprise software, and the last 15 years helping women sell shoes. So my first job was with Intel, and right now, a completely different job. I could tell you, databases and layers of databases, that's 15 years back. Today, I can tell you what happened in Cardi B's life this morning, right? And so you have to sort of become very authentic to your audience at that level.
So many times when the audience doesn't synergize or doesn't get the messaging, you tend to double question your product, right? So how do you, know that, hey, you are authentic, but people are not getting the message, or so for example,
let me ask you a
Poshmark
simple
case,
question.
right?
Do you have at least some people who you found believing in your product?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a question of scaling, not engagement. Are those people your friends and family, or are they people
No.
that you don't know?
I don't know.
Okay, they love your product.
Yes.
So if you have that, then you can scale, right? So it's really after that, it's more about
But
scaling.
those are the customers that we didn't recruit physically. We just, threw out marketing campaigns, Google AdWords and Facebook advertising, and recruited through those.
You recruited those.
Yes.
And have you
So-
talked to them?
No.
Have you visited them?
No, they live.
Do you know
all
them
over
by
US.
first name?
Sorry?
Do you know them by first name?
Some of them, a lot of them.
And so if you do, then I would figure out a way to connect with them and really try to understand who they are. Like even today, on every day, I talk to at least 100 end users every day. And I service about 20, 30 customer service requests every day. So you have to be in direct touch. And many of my consumers don't mind texting me even for a customer service request. So you build that connection at a very deep level, and that'll give you insight on how to even market your product.
That's great. Thank you.
Uday Kiran Chaka and IIT Delhi. So our current startup is actually in the smart home security space. And so we are actually planning to go through insurers as our channel. And this is, I think, Warren, you mentioned. So because we have a very small number of companies available, right? We really want to make sure our pilots, we are planning 2 pilots now, one in US with a very large insurer, like 55 million users, and another with a small insurer in Europe. So we're still debating, like, should we actually do this big pilot with this big insurer or not? What's your recommendation? This is our first one, a first paid pilot. We have done an internal pilot with friends and family, and that has been pretty good, but we're very nervous about going with this big company right away. Do you recommend, at least based on your experience, should we work with the small insurer first, make sure that it's a success, and then come back? Or do you see, like, just take it head on? They are encouraging us to do the pilot. Should we just go ahead and, do it? I'm curious how.
My recommendation would be, if you have managed to break open doors at such a large insurer, it's going to give you scale. Go ahead, and you'll also learn early on in your company what might fail. Once, if you go with a smaller one and then you go with a larger one 3 years down the lane, you already are getting that learning right now. So my recommendation would be to not get scared and take the deep dive.
Yeah, I would actually second that. Both my experience, 2 of my successful companies, the first customer was a huge customer. We were scared. In fact, they had a deployment was bigger than anything that we had in the lab. But what you learn is amazing. And you got to build this rapport. You don't try to hide anything. You got to be very open about what it is, because they have a vested interest in being sort of the technology, the leader, pioneer in something. So they have as much interest in trying to make you successful. That's what you got to make sure. So I'm all for try to go for the big one, but listen to them all the time and see what's happening.
Hi, Sudhir Singh from IIT Kharagpur. So my question is that, of course, there are unique ways you do B2B and B2C. But in consumer particularly, if we are doing a hardware product versus, let's say, Poshmark, which is like internet-based applications, are there some unique things about hardware? So some lights on that.
So your question is, are there unique aspects of marketing hardware?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, if one of you want to take it. Otherwise, I'm actually going to pull someone from the audience, which I know is not the right thing to do. But the gentleman standing way in the back out there, who's not expecting to get pulled in. Yeah. Yeah, can you?
Well, no, actually, I don't work in the hardware space, so I'm not in a position to be able to give much insight. But I think the question is more about specifically marketing hardware products in the consumer space. And so I don't even work in the consumer space, so sorry, I'm not in a position to.
Okay. Just again, the long shot I'm trying out. So do you want to take it, or do you want someone?
I just wanted to give one thought, which is...
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to give one thought, which is that at the end, when you're marketing to anything in the consumer space, the broad thing is that consumers do not buy on pure productivity message, which is very different than enterprise. It's not a problem solving. They buy on emotions. So if you have not heard Reid Hoffman's 7 cardinal sins sort of a thing, I would definitely encourage you to think about it. And then you have to say, what is the emotion your product is connecting on? And your entire value proposition, messaging has to be contingent on that in a very focused way at scale. So for example, if your product is built around providing something that's going to make me feel more secure, then that fear is sort of the core emotion you're sort of allaying in a way, right? If it is based on connection, you have to figure out what does connection produce, whether it is lust, or is it sloth, or what does it sort of do? Does it make me be lazier? Does it make me more greedy? Does it make me hungry? So you have to get to those primitive instincts and connect at that level. That's how you connect a product to the consumer. And you don't have to think in these explicit things. I also think on a flip side, so those are the negative side. At Poshmark, we say Poshmark is a platform powered by love. If you focus on love, money comes. If you focus on money, nothing comes. And everything we do aligns with that.
So,
Anand, actually, in the last session, I did have a consumer person, an enterprise person, and a hardware person. Mm-hmm. This time, I think I made a mistake. We should have had a hardware person, because I think marketing a camera is quite a different ballgame from marketing a server or a router.
Sure.
So the feedback loops that take place there might be different.
Well, but there are two very good examples that actually you can go read up on. One is Ring, the other is Nest. Both early stage companies. In fact, Ring was rejected by Shark Tank, became a $1 billion company bought by Amazon. They took a very simple approach to coming up with their thing. And there are case studies about them. So I would actually refer you to looking at a case study like Ring, where they had visibility, they had a simple, but look at the product. It was sort of a very simple idea, but if you think about it, it makes total sense, and it sort of is a right intersection of a lot of technology and security and people's concerns and everything else. So I think you need to go look at, you can talk to people obviously, but there are also really great case studies of companies coming from nowhere with very successful products. Yeah.
On that thread, the B2C products, I tend to feel that they are different than enterprise in terms of every B2C product has very unique. Like, for example, Poshmark was a very unique product. You did not have really a model to go after in terms of marketing. So my question to you, like in the early days when you were developing customers, you were getting the awareness. I'm sure you went through a lot of steps of learning and things which you kind of figured out and you followed this. If anything you can share, just like the way you shared that you still speak 20 customers a day. So anything which, the mental model you had, sort of the framework to sort of, spend your time, how to develop, and it kind of worked or what didn't work.
So Poshmark, when it started, was not considered a unique product. There were 65 companies chasing that space. So in my previous company before that, which was a social shopping company called Caboodle, it took us almost a year to find product market fit, from the first release. So I think the key here is to really understand that, and then you have to apply sort of this enterprise versus consumer product. I think in enterprise, you're really trying to shorten the cycle of something or really fix something on a productivity level. The consumer space is challenging because you really are not trying to fix things, even though you are fixing things. You're really providing something that connects to an emotional need. I'll give you an example. If you ask most people how much time they spend on Facebook or WhatsApp, people say, I never use it, right? How many people you meet? And at the same time, if you open up their phone, it'll be very, very frequently used app in terms of time spent, right? And you can argue with them, they'll never think that they use it. Or my daughter who says, I hate Snapchat. When you look at her phone, the last 60 notifications are all from Snapchat. So in consumer world, I think understanding the psychology and really getting that pure connection to what you're doing with them and understanding that pieces is really important. If you have scale, you can get that information a little bit from data, but prepare to be surprised around that. So I never completely trust anything that the consumer is telling me, right? I try to understand what they're really trying to say in that process. That's one thing. Second thing is, if one person says another thing and second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth person, you have to sort of coagulate and then come with your analysis on that piece. And the last thing is, in the consumer demographic, for a lot of products and services, including what I'm doing, is you will get early adopters who will actually give you completely false signals about your product, right? And they typically tend to be male users. So if you have a lot of male users in your product who are highly opinionated, completely get them out of your service, right? So those are all the issues that you deal with. And if you're building a product for yourself, you actually are the worst creator of that product. So you have to actually use people to overcome your blind spots. So those are sort of things to keep in mind. Otherwise, given your background, given who you are, you'll be able to analytically figure that out. The question is, how do you avoid your blind spots and sort of your instincts, which can lead you down the wrong path?
So let me ask one question for both of the panelists. So in most companies, there's always this early aha moment where you suddenly realize that, oh, you have a product and you have thing. And it's quite often different. I call it serendipitous in terms of finding the discovery of the fact that you have a product and a viable business. So maybe, Varun, I'll start with you. What is it that was the aha moment where you realized that, oh, there is a business here?
I think very similar to what you said, finding a large insurer That is something that was the aha moment. We actually managed to close AT&T. And AT&T is one of the largest telcos here. If they're going to sell mobile security from a startup, it probably is. It's the best mobile security on the planet that they could find. So that was the aha moment for us. And they are the ones who actually took Mobile Iron public. And Mobile Iron did X in year one. With AT&T, we did 3X with AT&T in year one. So that was the moment for us.
For Poshmark, it was, I distinctly remember, it was actually May of 2012, which was the big sort of moment for us. We launched the service, we were up for 6 months. I think we had maybe a total of 10,000 registered users, not active users, just 10,000 registered users. And we had launched the service with a $9 shipping fee, but we had discounted it launch at $5. And we were 3-4 months into it, so most of these users had never read the TOS, never. They just saw $9 cut, $5, they thought the shipping was $5. Well, as the volume was scaling, we were actually losing money on every transaction other than making 5 cents. So I said, let's price it back to $9, which wasn't unreasonable. So we just put a little note out there that we're going to change to $9. Within 24 hours, we had 250 emails, over 100 tweets, and almost 200 Facebook messages posted, which range from, I'm going to actually be naked, to my next day in the office, right? To your Poshmark is taking away my life, Poshmark is a rascal, all kinds of messages. I'd never seen that engagement even in my previous company when we had 2 million users, right? So I knew that we've hit a vein where we've become so critical to these people's life that a mere change of $4 in shipping is completely devastating them.
Putting $12, scratch it and put 9. That would have solved some of the problem.
Yes. Very, very, very true. We actually did not expect this. We thought it would be a very minor change, caused some convenience, whatever. We didn't expect this level of passion to come down.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's one thing I would encourage all of you to see what's the aha moment in anything. I mean, I'll use an example from a company, Responses, which is in online marketing. We actually were very early in online marketing, with email marketing, and direct marketing was a huge business. And we were trying to go to the traditional guys and saying, oh, you're going to go online and everything else. Suddenly, we had literally had 3 .coms all in 2 days come and say, oh, we need this. And they didn't have any baggage, they didn't have any direct marketing. They said, we need to do online marketing. And that was the aha moment that maybe, you forget about all the big guys because it's going to take a long time. Just go after all these .com guys and start selling them and start selling with a different price point. And our price point is, a few $1,000s a month. Those guys are used to spending $50,000. These guys spend a few thousand a month, but it was good. So I think it's very important to look for the aha moment. At the same time, if it's 2 years and you haven't got the aha moment, it's time to move on also. We all make the mistake. We all are stuck there. So it's very important that if you're not finding the aha moment, there are other opportunities. Go look for something else because, as one of my VC investors told me a long time back, you can never push against a string. So you got to look for the aha moment.
Okay, on that question, on that response that you gave, when a company goes through a pivot, how disruptive is it to all the marketing that you set up, and then all of a sudden you backtrack and it's a whole new ball game after that?
Okay, why don't you want to take the first?
Yeah, it's not easy. And coming from my own example of SkyCure, we were earlier positioned as the network security for mobile. And till date, competitors use that against you and say, oh, they only cover the network piece. They won't cover the malware. So you do the pivoting for the right reasons, but it's not easy to let go of the initial mass that you've created and reposition yourself as a new one. It sticks with you for a long time.
Anything to add? I guess you never had to pivot.
No. We've had to pivot, not in Poshmark. Poshmark, we're sort of still marching. In my previous company, we started as collaborative software and then coined the term social shopping. And I went to my sort of board and investors and said, we're going to launch it as social shopping. Everyone looked at me and said, why should shopping be social? And later on, as I was pondering on it, because we did launch it as social shopping, coined that term in 2006, I realized that I was looking at a bunch of 40-year-old men. For them, shopping was not social.
In the back.
Swami Irinki from IIT Kharagpur. I think we intermingle sales and marketing. There are two different departments, right? So when you're doing the marketing campaigns and generate the leads, at what metrics it triggers to a lead to be passed on to sales? Because sales has to close it. Marketing generates the leads. So it's not, is there any clear metrics that one has to say that, okay, at this time the lead should be passed on to sales for closure, right? Because getting the leads is a different ball game, closing is a completely different ball game.
Sure.
Yeah, I can definitely answer that one. And you'll always have this battle between the VP sales and VP marketing. I'm giving you all these leads and you're not closing. You're giving me crappy leads, that's why I'm not closing. That's always the case. And the way we solved that, so when a lead starts, first it's an email. All you know is an email. You don't know anything about that person. Then you know the name, the title, the company, and slowly you get smart about who they really are. Then that lead becomes an MQL, which is marketing qualified lead. Then that MQL becomes an SQL, which is sales qualified lead. Then it becomes SAL, which is sales accepted lead. Then it becomes an opportunity, stage 1, stage 2, and some companies have till stage 8 on opportunity. So this is kind of the lead flow, if you may. If you pass it on too early, you're actually doing a mistake on two fronts. One, you'll come back, the salesperson will come back and say, it was not a good quality lead, and sales is generally the more expensive resource, and he's doing the calling on those leads, and wasting his important time when he should be using him just to close. So what we did was, which is probably happens in less than 10% of the organizations, instead of giving the leads out, we actually gave opportunities out. So we created leads, MQL, SQL, all of that was still in marketing. So I had the cold calling team report into CMO instead of reporting into sales. So we called them, we set up the appointment, and we only asked the sales guy to show up to that meeting. So that kind of removed that friction between VP sales and VP marketing, brought our costs down because the sales guys were not doing cold calling on all these leads that we generated. So that's just my advice. Only 10% of companies do that. They'll have the ADR, BDR, that's the name for them, account development rep, business development rep, sales development rep, lead development reps, reporting into marketing instead of reporting into sales.
I have a question on pricing. Ram from IIT Madras. You talked about, consumers being very emotional. I frankly think, enterprises also is full of people who are emotional. But, really when you talk about pricing, you go through all the economic value analysis and, you sort of have a foundation on why you price an item the way it is priced. And then you go in front of, people, whether it's consumers or enterprises, and then you sort of, sell at 80% discount, 90% discount. That's happened, in a lot of the enterprises that I've sold in. So what is your experience on pricing? What is it that really, is what we need to take care of, when you price? From your experience, what works? I'll share actually an experience from the enterprise software world. It was 1998, so a long time back. We had a product which was priced at $10,000 per developer seat. And we wanted to, that was not sustainable, right? There was no SaaS or anything at that time. It was really a on-premise software. We wanted to make it a full enterprise class software. Our product was still in development, so we didn't even have a server attached to the product. So we just went in, and I was VP of products at that time, so we said, let's just change the pricing to $150,000, about $50K CPU. There was no CPU at that point in time. And we closed, in the next 6 months, 7 different deals ranging from $150K to $1 million, right? How did we do that? First thing was that when we said to the sales force, half the people wanted to resign because they didn't believe it. They said, how are we going to do that? Because they didn't have that. And those half people needed to leave because they could never sell a $150,000 product. Second thing is you have to actually justify the value proposition. And in those days, I don't know exactly what the right thing to do is. We used to write white papers, right? But the thing is you have to believe that your product is that valuable that you want to defend it. If you're willing to drop your pants, then you're always going to sort of back off in that whole process. So selling the price is part of the sales cycle.
Yeah, agree with that. You have to sell value. And Tesla does a great job. The nearest equivalent car is 60K, 50K. Why do they charge 100K for the same car? If you go get roof in your house, the cheapest roof is $20,000. Tesla will charge 50,000. How do they do that? They actually build it down to you, and sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. Oh, you make $300 an hour, you'll drive down to the gas station, spend 15 minutes, then get in the car. So you're spending that money, let me put that towards the value of the car. Roof, again, you're producing this much energy, it's going to save you this much money, so I'm going to charge you this much. Similarly, on the competitive front, look at what your competitor is charging. And if you really believe, truly believe your product is better than them, charge a premium on top. Going cheap is not always the best route. And if you're selling to Indians, we always like deals, right? If it is not at 80% discount, we don't like it. I don't like it. I like to buy at 80% discount. But make sure you're charging premium and make sure you are true to yourself that my product literally is better than the competing product and therefore I'm going to charge 20% more than them. But make sure you're providing value to the customer. I'm charging you this much. This is how I'm returning you this much money. It's something that we always forget. In your product, we assume that the customer knows that the product is producing value. If it is possible, not always it's possible, but if it is possible to add a dashboard of how much money is the product saving you, if a customer can log in and just look at a dashboard, this product has saved me this much money in the last year, I only spent 30% on the cost of this, that is the report, they'll take it to their manager and the exec committee as to this, there is ROI on this product. And customer will not do the math, you will have to do it for them. Make sure you prove ROI to them.
I'll share one more pricing example. At Poshmark, we launched the product with a 20% transaction fee, right? And most of the competitors at that time were charging 10, 12%. Now, what they included in the 10, 12% was a minuscule of what we included. There was a lot of pressure through the first 3 years to reduce the commission. And over the last 6 years, we've actually touched the commission only once, which was to add a minimum fee. So our commission was 20% in 2012, it's 20% in 2018. It will be the only marketplace that hasn't revised its fee policy in 6 years. So part of the value is that we always believe that that's the right pricing for the thing. In fact, I wanted prices 25%. My team kind of said, let's do 20%. But at any point in time, we actually never focused on commission, never focused on actually defending it. We changed the communication and the language with our customers into a completely different value proposition, which was around community and love, right? So commission became an afterthought. People who were focused on commission actually fought us. There were many marketing campaigns launched against Poshmark as we were succeeding on attacking our commission. We ignored them completely. Going to my premise, ignore the competition, right? And over time, what has happened is that those guys have had to raise their commission because 20% is what is needed to survive in this business. So now those guys they've had bad cohort churn problems because they feel like they're increasing their prices. Where today, we look like an amazing deal. So I think you have to believe, first thing which has to start is, do you believe that your pricing is fair? Because if you are screwing the customer, then you'll get screwed yourself. But if you believe your pricing is fair, then you have to be able to communicate in a language that makes sense to your customer, which could be feeds and speed, could be a language of love, could be a language of value, could be a language of competition, but that language has to be consistent and constant.
Samir Kalucha, IIT Delhi.
Manishi, right in the back. Oh. Okay, good. Good.
So staying on this consumer side of things, I'm involved with a transportation startup. So given what we know of things like Uber, what they did in their marketing strategies, the word of mouth and their loyalty programs, they did very well. But in your opinion, what's the most effective strategy they played, and how would you do it differently now that you have seen them? And what would be your advice for a company which is doing this both for the consumers and the drivers in the most effective, cost-effective way?
I think the cost-effective way has changed many times. I would say every probably 12 to 15 months, the growth channels that scale have changed. So that's why I said growth is very dirty. In fact, I just came from a board meeting and we were discussing growth. and how we are thinking about growth has again changed. If you use the old CAC LTV models, they don't work, even as of what we are doing today. Having said that, I would say that in the very early days of the consumer, you have to find something that actually fits in with the vein of your product. So if I sat down and kind of looked at your product and sort of said, what are the pieces, I could conjecture, where the best things would be. How it works out boils down to how effectively you execute against that channel, number one. And number two, is the channel working today? So for example, if you look at a product like Snapchat as a distribution channel, certain kind of products work really well for it. Our product works well for distribution, but not for activation on Snapchat. On the flip side, if I look at something like a Pinterest, it works great for activation if we get very high quality users, but given their state of ad technology, it actually works for low volume stuff, right? Now we are so broad that actually television is working very well for us, which a year back you would have said, and it's very hard to track television, so you have to think about it differently. In 2013, 2014, Facebook was the best medium of choice, and it still is a dominant medium. So the answer is really a bunch of things. One channel that we haven't talked about, and I think indirectly it even applies to enterprise, but certainly applies to consumer, is the influencer channel, right? And I believe that for early startups, that can actually add an oomph around it because it's highly targeted. It's P2P, but it's P2P2P out. So you're not doing selling, you're really placing what you're trying to do as a message through people going out to their followers, et cetera. So you can, stuff that I did through events, you can do through a little bit more sort of structured way. There are platforms available to reach them. So I think that's a very unexploited channel. And in fact, a lot of Asian startups are using that to penetrate the American market because they don't have access to traditional media in the same way that we do. Ultimately, people do use Facebook, Google, et cetera. But this influencer channel, I would highly advocate, particularly either using influencers on YouTube, which is very effective if you have a video message, or influencers on Instagram.
Way back there.
I have a question. There was a time when the whole market, whether or not you made a profit or a loss, was chasing eyeballs, including Facebook. So they ran negative for quite a while before they made the upturn. What would be your recommendation for chasing an eyeballs market?
Let me first start here. That clearly was in the whole days of, well, even now in terms of sites having huge number of eyeballs and then hoping to monetize it based on ads. I think there's going to be less and less companies that are going to have negative margins. I mean, it's okay to grow and have a loss while you're growing and building more customer share. But if the fundamental value proposition is that it's about eyeballs, but I don't know how I'm going to get the revenue out of the eyeball, then I think that it's not going to work. And I think that, you're seeing a backlash in a lot of the advertising models, the pure advertising models now, because of the fact that it really isn't sustainable.
Well, I think eyeballs, as it was thought in the dot-com days, was flawed, right? Eyeballs, as we think about today, is slightly different for several reasons. First of all, if you're going to use paid growth as an engine of growth, right, then that paid growth has to have a positive ROI, which means you have to have a proven monetization model to spend money on paid growth. If you're growing virally and you're growing through word of mouth at a very fast rate, then lots of monetization things are appealing to you. So going back to the eyeball question, Instagram in its first year of monetization generated a little over $3 billion of revenue, right? Paid for all of the acquisition price plus 6 years of losing money. So at the point you turn into positive EBITDA, you can wipe out years and years of low EBITDA if you can do it at scale. However, the reason why eyeball models fail is because you don't have any inherent net positive growth driver at scale, right? So when you think of what you're trying to do, it isn't about eyeballs, it isn't about transaction, it's about subscription, it is about growth. If you have to use money to drive growth, then you better have money coming out that is predictable, right? If you don't have it, then you're basically screwed. So you need to have net positive growth engine that you can drive over long periods of time.
My name is Sukhvinder Lamba. So I'm from IIT Roorkee. I come from dark side of enterprise sales. I switched to enterprise sales. Very few of IITians have done that. But I want to get your opinion on, different compensation model when a startup is ready to hire the VP of sale. And I'll give you three, I would like you to weigh on three things. First, many startups do just the pure, commission only. They have some sales advisor, they go and hire a bunch of sales advisor, and they say, okay, they're going to do just, 10 or 15 of them, and then they'll launch their market. The second is direct, base plus the commission model. And the third is, which is equity and base plus commission model, the higher end of the things. So give your opinion as to how would that work for an enterprise B2B sales market for a startup.
Warren, this is up your alley.
Yeah. Did you say hiring VP sales? Is that what you started with? I think you have to understand what other option do they have. Why would they come work for you? If you're only doing the first option of consultative, I'm going to pay you 15 points for each sales deal that you bring, they'll use their time where they make the most money. So if your product is not the one that they'll sell the most, they won't accept that offer. Second one, base plus commission is great for mid-level sales, starting sales. If you're talking about VP of sales, they have to buy into your vision. And the way they do it is with the equity game. So if you're talking about VP sales and a very good candidate, you be ready for the third one. That would be my recommendation. First two, you're probably getting a quality B player, not the A player, because the A players already have the other option.
So Manishi just reminded me to make sure that we cover all the topics. And I think that one general area that I would like to address is the marketing budget, the marketing spend at different stages of the company. What stage do you hire a CMO? What stage do you build a team? Where do you start building in terms of programs? So some general guidelines, both I think from an enterprise perspective as a consumer perspective.
Yeah, on the initial side of enterprise startups, so you'll actually have to spend $1 million to make $1 million. And this is initial. Don't go, if your goal is to go grab the market, then don't go cheap on things. Because you will have the early movers advantage. And that's the way to really scale and grow faster than anyone else. So if you have to spend $1 million to make $1 million, do it. Make sure you're not just spending all of it on the headcount. And out of that $1 million, if 800,000 is going on headcount, you're only spending 200,000 on programs. That 200,000 with a golden ratio of 10 to 1. Golden ratio, if you think about it, is every dollar that you put in, what number of dollars come in the pipe. So if you are putting in $1 and you're actually getting $3 back in pipe, you'll probably close 1 in 3 deals. It's a wipe off. If you're putting in $1 and you're getting 5 in pipe, golden ratio is 5, which is okay. Golden ratio of 7 is very good. Golden ratio of 10 is excellent. So if you're only left with $200,000 of variable budget for campaigns, and even if your golden ratio is 10, you're bringing in $2 million in pipe, and you're closing 1 in 3 deal, you're only getting 700,000 out of it. So make sure you do the math. This is what I'm putting in. This is the variable campaign. This is my golden ratio. This is what's going to come in pipe. This is my close ratio number. And this is the number that's going to come in revenue. That's how you do your math. And I'm only talking about marketing right now. Then you have sales expenditure. Then you have engineering. Then you have your cloud hosting. All of that is something you need to look at as well before you do the budgeting.
What about in consumer business?
So consumer businesses are tricky because the volumes and scale become quite different, right? So I would say that to scale a consumer business, especially if you're going to scale it with some level of spend marketing, you need to have a decent sized budget, which means you have to figure out what milestone you're getting to. Still, you either have investment or, if you're cash flow positive, that's amazing. If you have positive ROI spend. which is, I would say 80-90% that's unlikely in the early days. So that's sort of rule one. So you have to figure out what milestone you're getting to. The second thing is, I think having someone who's going to directly execute your campaigns and set up some DNA is probably the first hire, which is kind of the model equivalent of a salesperson, right? Before you even hire a marketing person, you need a salesperson, at least in enterprise sales and consumer. You need someone who can actually market your product directly without a lot of layers in between. Getting to a CMO scale, we actually haven't hired someone under the title of CMO even so far, is a different thing because CMO is an ill-defined role in consumer. In enterprise, at least, you have marketing and sales, which are distinct. In consumer, you have growth, which is actually growth marketing, and then you have everything else related to brand marketing, PR, the softer aspects, which may not be as ROI-able. So trying to integrate the two disciplines, I've studied a lot of org structures. They sort of sometimes combine them, sometimes split them. But the growth marketing, which is equivalent to sales, is kind of a very different thing. These people have the DNA of an enterprise salesperson. They are very ROI-driven. They are very metrics-driven. They're very goal-driven. And so having those people is probably the leading thing. And that's sort of bulk of our marketing spend and focus.
So I have a simple way of looking at it. In a consumer business, the first marketing person is really your evangelist, the person who's going to be the evangelizer and who's actually going to be selling to your target customer. In the case of enterprise, the first marketing person is really a program person, knows how to have the right kind of program triggers so that you can get the 10x return that you would get. So a little different in terms of the style of a person you hire first in marketing. How are we doing on time, by the way?
Yeah, I have one question on one of those topics.
Sure, go ahead.
I think the question is on search engine optimization. So we did hire a couple of CEO companies. So how I gauged them was like when I searched for search engine marketing terms, they would rank high in Google. And then when I hired them, they did not do a good job in terms of English. Like there were a lot of grammatical errors. The links were leading to 404 pages, and then when I encountered them, and then I realized they were outsourcing all the work to Philippines, and then that was so my experience with CEO companies has not been good. I've only even after paying money, we have gotten into spammy SEO. So how do you go about doing SEO?
So do you guys have experience in what has worked for you in terms of SEO?
Yeah. SEO is a very crowded market, and you'll find a lot of companies who would say, I'm going to make sure you rank on the page 1 for these 20 keywords. The question is, who's searching for those 20 keywords? They'll try to game it so much that you would think that you're doing amazing, but somehow your funnel looks empty. So that's absolutely something you have to be on top of. Those keywords are provided by you, first of all. If you're getting 404 errors, you probably did not pay attention to it early enough, and they went live, and that's when you're seeing it. With SEO, organic content, providing value to the customer, writing a lot of content yourself, all of that works out great. But you are a single person, and you can't do everything. In those cases, you should look into outsourcing. But always, no matter when you do this, always find references. Who else did they work with? Did they work with a hardware company like yours, a security company like yours? SEO is not same for everyone. So you have to be very, very targeted when you're talking about, I am doing this for IT companies, for services company. On that note, I'll actually, so don't just blindly follow SEO. A few other tips, as I said, I'm going to add it. Someone mentioned it before we started. Don't buy lists. When someone says, I have this amazing list of 25,000 users, you can email it to them for only $5,000. Don't do it. It's not going to work. You would find out later, so don't do that. Don't buy awards after you have done the first 3. So sometimes the first 3 you'll have to do it. And if you have, this is kind of called the confidence builder on your website. Someone you're providing value with, this is what we do, this is how we do it, this is why our approach is better than everyone else's. Here is the customer who has bought us, and here are some confidence builder awards. But every now and then you'll see, oh, I'm a Silicon Valley magazine out of Fremont, and we're choosing your company as the award of the year. don't buy it. That's not going to help you. And last one I'll add, I have a few more, but last one I'll add is never pay for TV. You'll get this emergency call from a producer. I'm with Kathy Ireland show, and this is a 2-minute spot. It's going to get aired in 250 cities. It's going to be amazing brand value for your company. Don't buy it. $20,000, $30,000 will go to waste. So those are some of the tips in addition to SEO.
Let's hear Manish on the SEO part of it.
Sure. I think my advice would be that a lot of times, when we are looking at SEO, you're outsourcing some of the core pieces. So there's SEO structure and there's SEO content. And I really think that for the content to actually scale for your business, it has to be authentic. So I'd much rather hire a community manager than an SEO company. And even if you can only afford it as a consulting thing. Based on your questions from the earlier, I feel like you're looking for that growth knob, through all of these pieces. But the growth knob has to be somewhat earned, right? And so to do that, you have to put together a somewhat of a strategy, right? And I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong. The good thing is you're experimenting constantly, which is awesome. I think you're trying everything out, which is great. You're measuring it, which is great. But I think at the same time, investing in some of these things which may not produce a short-term ROI will start to produce ROI in 60 to 75 days. And that is where you have to start to invest in the core pieces, which is some sort of a partner, even if you hire them as a consultant. And when I was talking about in-housing, I would say in the consumer business, in-housing these things in the early days is useful. Having someone who can then work with these in-house people, if you can afford that, is great. But if you can't, in-housing will always produce a higher ROI than outsourcing it.
Anand, are we kind of okay on that list?
Yeah, I think we touched on all different aspects of it, but if anyone has any specific question on I think we covered most of it. There are more detailed things, like, for instance, webinars. So, Varun, you might want to talk about, because webinars is very successful in technique for enterprise marketing.
Yeah, webinars are usually very good. Do many of them. Make sure you're providing value. Make sure they're technical and not just fluffy webinars. One trick that works is do an on-demand webinar, but position it as a live webinar. On Wednesday at 11 a.m., we will do this live product demo and talk about the space, talk about your solution, and then take questions live. But the first part of it is actually recorded. But once you start playing it at 11 a.m. on Wednesday, not everyone on the other side knows it wasn't live. So do smart tricks like that. But webinars do produce good quality leads, especially if you're not touching, if it's running in an automated way, it's even better. And don't buy lists to promote webinars again. That's not going to help.
Yeah, my one piece of advice also is, as Manish mentioned, authentic content is very important. And no matter what kind of company you are. And one of the things many companies don't realize is, even if they are marketing enterprises, they're always struggling with, how can I get the blog content? Well, actually, a lot of your engineering team can provide some of the blog content. And they're great sources of blog content, but they don't think it's a priority or even. Suppose you make everyone say, everyone's a marketer, just like everyone's a salesperson, everyone's a marketer. Your job is to produce one blog once a month. Spread it over engineers, you'll get really authentic blog content. And that's what attracts people, because given that content, you can use it for SEO, you can use it for social media marketing, you use it for email drip campaigns. The content is the fuel, and that content has to be authentic. If you get third-party guys who will write 100 words for so many bucks, won't work.
Okay, we take the last question from here.
Hi, my name is Sri Mohan. I'm from IIT Madras. A question on attribution. So you've spent all this, you got a sale. How do you know what worked, what contributed?
So I'll give a quick answer, then I'll turn to Mani. There are actually very good products that actually handle attribution. In fact, when you saw the marketing stack out there, even in the second one, there are some attribution products that do a pretty good job of, and that actually is a very important thing for when you have multiple sources of marketing to figure out which one is working. As Manish mentioned, you got to know your ROI. Maybe you guys have some very specific products that you might suggest.
Yeah, so, there's so many products, I think you can look at it. I will tell you that in the early days, particularly the first 2-3 years, mobile attribution was terrible. And still in many cases, it's terrible. So we had to come up with our own ways of assessing marketing and ROI. So if you can get attribution, amazing. If you don't get it, you have to still put KPI and funnels and start to sort of figure out how you're going to measure your ROI across the board. We're having to do that yet again at this late stage with TV advertising, right? And we're struggling in how to do that. But at the end of the net metrics are still very positive. So we can guess that it's actually impacting, and we'll come up with a model. So what I say with attribution is, if you can get it. Even when you get it, it will be somewhat inaccurate because there are sources that over-attribute themselves, particularly our friends in Menlo Park called Facebook. They're aggressive in attribution to themselves. Partly is they have so many of the eyeballs. The second thing is, even when you attribute, combine it with common sense knowledge so you don't over-index on an attribution. And then the third thing is, assume that there's still a big fraction of your organic traffic that is unattributed traffic at every point in time. So I always used to do paid ROI and blended ROI. And in fact, we found that blended ROI was a better metric to drive growth than pure paid ROI.
That I would add to that, there are products, as Bright Funnel is one of them. If you're investing in an attribution product late in the game, that's good. In the early part of it, as Manish said, most of the time it might be wrong because they would have seen your ad, they would have heard of it, and they would go type in your www.yourwebsite.com. There is no way on the planet you'll find where did they come from, right? So there are other ways of doing it organically without using a product. For example, they clicked on something, they came to your website, they downloaded a white paper, then they attended a webinar, then they did something else, and that's when they became a customer. So do you give that attribution to the first thing that they clicked on or the last thing that they did? Or a little bit of it everywhere? One model that works okay is give 30% attribution to the first campaign they interacted with, 30% to the last one they interacted with, and 40% split it between all the campaigns that they interacted with. That is kind of a blended model that we used. And if you are looking for a product, Bright Funnel does a decent job.
Okay, with that, guys, I think we'll come to a close. You can always mob the speakers after this. Let's give them a big hand. That was an excellent session and excellent moderation by Anand. So you can break now, and again, offline questions, you can take it up with speakers. There's some food at the left at the back. If there are any bachelors, clean it up.
Anything I can help with, varunkohli@gmail. More than happy to. I just got acquired 8 months ago, so have some cycles to help out.
I'm still running a